Hello, my fellow sensitive people. It is I, your favorite oracle, here to deliver all of the good news about all of the things, gosh darn it, you're worried about. But before we get started, it would be awesome if you could like, share, and subscribe. I really appreciate it as we boldly march towards 100,000 subscribers. We're almost there. Oh, so close, and yet so far. Listen, folks, pick a chair, take a seat, grab your coffee or whatever your beverage of choice is. We got to talk. And when I say we got to talk, I mean we got to talk. Now, who here saw the Davos speech? All right, you saw that? I didn't. I saw parts of it. I try to limit how much I watch of Donald Trump for my own mental health, but continually eating to push down what is coming up, that is basically how you have to just, sipping or just trying to keep this thing from coming up as you contemplate the thing that is in the White House, this thing that we must address. Now, we have been looking at the health of Mr. Trump, and what we found was rather disturbing. We decided that we would do a mock examination of Trump. We thought we would pretend that he was patient A, and we just threw his symptoms into the computer, and what are we going to get? And what the computer said is that it looked like a patient post-stent with type 2 diabetes, congestive heart failure that was mild to moderate congestive heart failure. So in the staging, I'll go ahead and show you what we've got here. And this is just based on physical presentation of patient, age of patient, medical history of Donald Trump. I'll show you what we came up with. Now, it's interesting that their doctors are now saying that they did a CT of Donald Trump's heart. They've admitted that they did a CT of Donald Trump's heart. That's kind of interesting to me because that's really what the computer honed in on. It wasn't honing so much on, based on the data, it wasn't honing on the fact that Trump was senile, though frontotemporal dementia, there are signs of that as well. This was focusing on the working diagnosis of congestive heart failure with a New York Heart Assessment at level 2-3. So that's mild to moderate. So he's right at the point where you have to start limiting flying. So we know that Donald Trump is not flying as much as he used to. The Davos flight to Switzerland was 8 hours. That's twice as long as doctors would recommend for a patient with congestive heart failure. We're pretty sure we're looking at congestive heart failure just because patient is obese, patient has a past history of eating junk food and falling asleep. He also went missing several times, which leads us to suspect he might have had stents placed, which would have led to 7 to 14 day fatigue time, which is something that they go into here. Even possibly the time when this took place could have been between November 4th and November 19th. But I would just pay attention to this part of the working diagnosis that the computer came to, and that is chronic venous insufficiency, which is aggravated or caused by a weak heart pumping. And so there's a buildup of, fluid in the pipes. And then you have to give the person something like Lasix, particularly after a long flight, because you're worried about blood clots. And so that is why the patient is usually encouraged not to take flights greater than 4 hours. And of course, we have Plavix, which you're regularly probably tested for, would explain part of the dorsal hand marks. Spironolactone, probably metformin as well. The bilateral cankles that were analyzed, why it was done on the dorsal of the hand, probably rolling veins in a senior. Also, there were cognitive things, paraphasia, spatial disorientation, etc. We don't know why he's limping. Limping could be anything from arthritis to a stent placed in the groin, which can cause chronic pain in some patients post stent, and they may be a wide gait to keep from rubbing against the injury, particularly if they're slow to heal. So we'll often see that gait in a patient post stent with it when they've had a groin stent placed. But it matches up with the fact that the doctors had said that he had had a abdominal CT to look at his heart health. That would make a lot of sense given the patient's profile. Now we can talk a little bit about his cognitive health, mixing up Greenland with Iceland. He was tired. Like I said, he shouldn't be doing flights. He's between a 2 and a 3 on the New York Heart Assessment, so he's not like a 4 or 5 bedridden, but it's starting to be pronounced enough where they're probably controlling how many flights he's taking and certainly how many long distance flights he's taking. And sure enough, we don't see a lot of long distance flights. Maybe he'll do a long distance greater than 4 hours every few months, but we'll probably be seeing even less than that because it seems like every time this guy gets on a plane and goes anywhere more than 8 hours, his entire system falls apart. And I think the reason partially for that is because he's on so many medications. You know, they would probably be giving him extra spironolactone to keep his edema down. He's probably not sleeping, and he's on a ton of other things in order to create the appearance of, homeostasis, this ability for him to function. But boy, it's not looking too good. I thought we would do the empath's prayer and take a look at his cards. People always want to know one thing: when is he leaving? I don't know if we can predict the exact time when he's leaving, but we began to see that it was over at the end of December, and that's when the Epstein files started to get dumped and when there started to show serious cracks in the GOP. And now we're seeing even more cracks in the GOP as more and more people are starting to demand transparency with the Epstein files, which of course are not being released. We don't have to tell you we don't want to give you we don't have to give you the Epstein files. And so it's an obvious cover up. Of course, according to Marjorie Taylor Greene, Trump is defending his friends. This reminds me of the times that we had to ask an embarrassing question of an expert, and we always said, well, I'm asking for a friend. It wasn't me. It was my friend that was asking about the embarrassing, jock itch or whatever the embarrassing thing is. Well, it was my friend who did. I wasn't at the parties. It was my friend that was, it was him. He did that. Right? So what we know about Donald Trump is that his friendships don't really last. He tends to burn through friendships, often betraying them by sleeping with his friends' wives and all the other number of defrauding them in business. He really doesn't keep friends. Even Epstein, he had a falling out with because of, real estate deals and everything else. So he's not known for loyalty, and he's not known for loyalty of protecting his friends. So the obvious question is Donald Trump hiding the Epstein files because he wants to protect? Because, one of my friends might be, I heard from a friend that there's really salacious stuff in there about parties at such and such an address at such and such a date at such and such. I heard my friend was there. Right. Okay, let's do the empath's prayer. Let's go in and take a look. Great to see you here. Be sure and share, like, and subscribe. And thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Okay. I want to call on white light protection for myself and this community as we ask permission from Spirit to access the Akashic records. We call on our spirit guides and our good angels to be with us. Please give us the clarity and the wisdom that is needed to empower all of us on our journeys to make the best decisions for ourselves, our families, the planet, the people we love. but also to help those that we may have strife with. And together collectively as a community, we say, Amen. So supposedly Jack Smith is in the Congress speaking today. That should be interesting. Let's go ahead and let's take a look first at Trump's health, and we'll also see what's going on with Congress. I feel as Congress, when I go into this energy, that we can't do anything against Donald Trump because we are afraid of our constituents that watch Fox News, and we rely heavily on them because they're the people that put us in Congress, and we have to run for Congress. In a couple of months here, we're back on the campaign trail, so there's this fear. They don't know what to do. Have we reached a tipping point where they can begin to, at least in those vulnerable districts, break away from Donald Trump? They have to be very strategic here. If you're a Republican in a blue state or a purple state, this could be a problem. Taking the weapons of war away. Taking the weapons of war away. Interesting imagery to think about. Taking the weapons of war away. That is the 5 of Swords, and being in a position of power leads me to suspect that this could be viewed that way, that we could be viewing it as a situation where we have a madman that has the tools. We have a madman that is terrorizing the world, threatening to attack Greenland, threatening to attack his fellow Americans, dragging people off the street, arresting Native Americans with Native ID on indigenous lands and telling them they might be faking it. So the 5 of Swords traditionally is when the enemy backs down and the weapons of war are taken away. And this goes back to some of the remotes we'd talked about, where we will see Trump having to back down from some of his draconian policies because of pushback by Republicans and everyone else. And you could see that nice magician card coming in, which is this power coming back against a struggle. So it's a power struggle between Trump and basically everyone else. We've also talked about death and how death is a grief process. We've talked about the grieving process, that it starts with denial. And that's pretty much what we saw with the GOP when it came to Trump's health. They were in denial. They pretended he wasn't sick, that everything was okay. And then we went into a state of anger where there was lashing out. And we're seeing that now, lashing out, threats of violence, particularly now that the Epstein material is starting to surface. And we can talk a little bit about that as well. But now we are entering into the fear domain. We're moving out of anger, and we're moving into bargaining. We're moving out of the anger into bargaining, which encompasses fear. This fear and this desire to try and negotiate in order to salvage a presidency that has really hit the skids. He's in the 38 percentile. Some say as low as 36%. He's getting hit really hard with the economy. The Epstein file, his refusal to hand over the Epstein file, was also something that certainly tanked his numbers. The treatment of immigrants with ICE, he's in the water over that. The economy, housing, you name it. This presidency is lame duck. And I think that speaks to why I heard this end coming in 5 months, around the December, January time, which we're in right now, is the death of this presidency. And it starts with dismantling his ability to do anything. And that is because we see more and more people peeling away from the GOP and the Democrats gaining more and more power. It's predicted that they'll gain as much as 36 seats in the midterm just because the Republicans are so low in the numbers. Also, Democrats are very motivated to vote, and the Republicans are not. The crossing card indicates a new beginning starting in spring of 2026. and that we are headed towards smooth waters. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do, but the work will be achieved. Six of Swords is, I read swords as years. It would indicate smooth waters laying ahead for many years to come. And we can see this extreme anger, this inability to control the narrative that's coming from Donald Trump. And we can feel the anxiety. We can feel the anxiety, the fear. And it's having an interesting impact on the country as a whole. I think that the nation is officially abandoning the president. I think that certain things happened that caused it to end. I also want to say that we're in one of the worst blizzards in recorded U.S. history. As we'd predicted when we went into the remotes, January and February would be one of the coldest I've ever felt when I've been a remote viewer. It almost feels like an Arctic freeze in many parts of the Northeast. And I don't think it's good for Donald Trump, given his health challenges, his age, his edema, his poor circulation. He probably doesn't want to be in a place with that kind of extreme, harsh weather. So he's more inclined than ever to be staying in Florida. Like I said, Five of Pentacles is a poverty card. It often involves abandoning someone or some situation in order to seek redemption or to get inside the church. We see things are changing very rapidly with the Eight of Wands, and it is a time of endings. The hope and fear is the thief. Of course, Donald Trump is perceived of as the thief. The other thing is I want people to stop stressing. Just be sure you're taking care of yourself. You're taking care of your own home environment. You're making sure that you have your needs met for a rainy day. The main focus should be your own welfare and not letting yourself get upset about one individual who probably will be removed. And I just don't see much of a future for Donald Trump. I really don't. It's interesting when you look at his cards also, because these are the cards. I'll pull this back a little bit more so you can see it better. These are the cards of somebody who, how's that? Is that all right? Yes. Yeah. These are the cards of somebody who, got to check my, sorry. Thought I heard my own voice. All right, that's great. So these are the cards of somebody that is just very stressed out. You can see endings here and new beginnings around spring. Stressed out, the president's card. Hopes and fears, the thief who leaves a situation. Here again, look at this, endings, and there's J.D. Vance right there in the 8th house. I have my concerns about J.D. Vance. He's certainly not popular with most people, and if he's going to be pushing the same agenda, this is J.D. Vance's card. You know, if he's going to be pushing the same agenda as Project 25, then that is a big, big problem. But yeah, I see movement. I see him continuing to lose support, and it's likely that his health takes him out. And I think the reason we see that is because it's becoming increasingly obvious that he has a health problem. I want to also say that part of what his cabinet is doing by collecting all of this data on Trump is that they have evidence now to issue Article 25. So every time they collect information on him, and Trump is aware of that, they're basically creating evidence that can be used against him when they pull the plug on him. I want to take a look at the effects of Jack Smith's testimony. Let's take a look. I have no patience. The patience to play the game of keeping these rich people out of prison is just, and I'm so tired of people saying no man is above the law when they clearly are above the law. I just find it repulsive to me. They are above the law. They will continue to be above the law in till we get control of our country and begin to demand otherwise. You can see the investigation coming with Jack Smith is quite powerful. First, we have this amazing research card coming in, the hermit, which is the academic, the intellectual that researches things, often bears light to something. And you can see the power stands with Jack Smith. This would lead me to suspect that Jack Smith is actually having quite an influence on Congress right now. And we can see his first house is he was stymied. He felt like he couldn't do his job effectively. He was controlled by the investigations work. He was controlled. Jack Smith was not able to do everything he wanted to do. He was blocked. They blocked him in terms of releasing documents, and obstruction is one of the things that he's claiming. That Eight of Swords and that confusion would indicate that he was obstructed, possibly at the highest levels of intelligence agencies. Particularly now when you see that devil card past placement, as if they were kind of addicted to Donald Trump, as if it was Donald Trump that kept them trapped and confused. And they keep talking about April here. They keep talking about the summer being a time of major transitions, and I don't know what that's about, if we're talking about potentially a new president coming in or the end of Trump. Interesting other thing that's come out in this information with Jack Smith has to do with exposure about finances. We can see an Ace of Pentacles is moving in. That has me curious because that could indicate that they uncovered some economic relationship with it, possibly agitators from January 6th, or that money was traced back. We can see here also this world card moving in, the hopes and fears, the global implications, and then the final outcome is patience. One of the things that Jack Smith has is patience, but I can tell you his evidence and how he's able to prove his case has something to do with finding the money. There was an investigation or building of a case regarding exposure of money. Also, Two of Pentacles is a wheeling and dealing card. So Jack Smith was able to prove his case because he caught the robbers with the money. That's basically what they're saying. Economic transactions or any protesters or any money that was paid to anybody that was part of the Oath Keepers, showing a close relationship with Donald Trump and the people that led the insurrection. So the downside of all of this is the mental and physical toll it's taken on Jack Smith, which he has not been public about. And that's kind of interesting, is that there isn't a lot of public information about just what they have done to Jack Smith. He's very stoic. He's very fact-based. He doesn't talk a lot about how he has been intimidated, his family's been intimidated, etc. All right, the last questions I'm getting have to do with the case of Donald Trump and Sasha Riley Barrows. There have been a ton of people investigating the case to find out what's true, what's not true, and things that don't make sense about the Sasha Riley Barrows case. When we look at the people that were being trafficked and abused in the 90s, 2000s, image that emerged was that of young, aspiring fashion models, beautiful young girls that were trying to get ahead in the fashion industry, whether it was through Elite Modeling Agency or Trump Modeling Agency or pageants. And we found that wealthy predators were going to these places because they were trying to find the most beautiful people to exploit. So they had moved on to the most beautiful people in the world. The most beautiful people in the world were the people that they were targeting. So who were Jeffrey Epstein's clients? We know he had an Austrian passport and claimed a Saudi identity. So we know he was very heavily involved with the British government. the British aristocracy. There are pictures of Epstein at Balmoral Castle in Scotland with Ghislaine, I'll never be able to pronounce her name. So the biggest connection that Epstein had was here in the United States with the FBI and US intelligence. And the second biggest perpetrators, surprise, it wasn't the Jews. I know you're disappointed. It was actually the Brits. It was the British. It was the British aristocracy, good old Church of England. Yeah, those were the people that were number one on his list. But then we also see secondary people involved also. The Austrian government seems to be involved in some capacity. But the Saudis, United Arab Emirates, Salman, who was accused of beating his wife, she had to leave to Britain. I think one of his kids, a couple of his kids were murdered and hauled off, and God knows where. That was Prince Saeed. He's been linked. Salman, who beats his wife, nearly beat his wife to death out. MBS, Mohammed bin Salman out of Saudi Arabia, nearly beat his wife to death. He's been implicated in all of this. So we're talking about a lot of countries being involved. And what it looked like to me is that you had a group of very, very, very poor people out of places like Alabama, Oklahoma, and Texas. And they were running very brutal brothels. They were making child sex tapes. They were doing snuff tapes. And this was an extremely poor group of people in the 1980s. According to Sasha Riley Barros, one of the brothels that he was sent to was in Duncan, Oklahoma. So I did some research, and in fact, there have been quite a few human trafficking cases in these states, along with missing children, because these are extremely poor states. So this is a different population than the high-profile, wealthy fashion models that were being abused on Epstein's Island. So that's the first discrepancy. This is an isolated group of extremely poor people making snuff films with kids that have disappeared through adoption and foster care system, right? However, when we look at what Epstein says, Epstein may have started his operation with a really poor group of people sometime between 1982 and 83. We also know that he had connections in Michigan. He was connected with a school out of Michigan. I think they were endorsing a school out of Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. He may have even donated money to a school out of Michigan. So somehow Trump gets involved with a group of people that a wealthy New York aristocrat would never be found dead with. This is not his crowd. And I think that is the thing that people have the biggest issue with, where Trump and this child abused from this dirt poor, primitive conditions was just not going to be attracting the same kind of abusers that you would see on Epstein Island, right? But a lot changes between 1983 and 2003 for Jeffrey Epstein. He starts off small this sketch that you're looking at was created by Jeffrey Epstein, and he put a lot of time into this sketch. But what does the sketch really mean? Well, it shows him pursuing children in 1983 as some guy in jeans, some creepy guy approaching kids. And then you see him in 2003, 20 years later, in the lap of luxury with his own jet, his own private island. And he seems to be suggesting that whatever his actions were in 1983, it resulted in extreme wealth in 2003. And so you begin to wonder, is this the point at which he starts exploring who's making kiddie porn, these creepy people out of Alabama, Oklahoma, etc.? And can I get involved in this business? And can I begin somehow as a go-between with these people and bringing some of these people to parties and getting them blackmailed along with Wexler, etc. Is this how I'm going to go make my money? And at that point, he transitions to a higher clientele, and he begins to move towards a wealthier group of people to blackmail. He starts blackmailing people. It's not a small town judge. Now it's the future president of the United States. And so he seems to start small in 1983 with this group of creepy people, and then he evolves into a new group of people. What is interesting about the Sasha Riley story is that it's taking place a long time ago. It's taking place in 1983, just like the victim who came forward from 1983, who was abused in Michigan, who also claims that Epstein and Trump abused her. But what's interesting again is she points to Michigan, which Epstein has strong connections with. So does Trump, who used to have a gambling casino, a nightclub on a boat, I guess, in Michigan, and this 1983 connection. So I think that was the discrepancy for people. I think it had to do with the time, 1983 being 10 years previous. And according to Grok, his time, 1983, for Epstein was opaque. We really don't know what he was doing. He was working with Stern. He quits with Stern, but people don't really know what he's up to. Well, what he appears to have been up to is researching the porn industry and using it as a way of blackmailing people. And then he eventually evolves into blackmailing some of the most powerful people in the world. That's basically what it looks like. Now, the darkest aspect of all of this is that these blackmail schemes appear to be for sale. These blackmail schemes appear to be for sale, which means that if you've got the money, you can buy the tapes, you can buy the contraband, and then you too can blackmail this individual. So let's throw a theory out. Let's just throw a theory out and have you guys think about it. What if Project 25, what if the Heritage community, the Heritage organization, what if they were the ones investing in this contraband? What if it's the right-wing evangelicals that are the ones that's using God's money from church donations and then funneling it to these various lobbying groups that are promoting evangelical Christian ideas? And they need to get people on board, which means that they need to pressure and blackmail certain people in positions of power. So wouldn't it be crazy if those evangelical organizations were the very organizations that took church money in order to blackmail certain people in positions of power with these types of tapes? If that comes out, and if that's what we're looking at, that's a hell of a story. All right. I want to thank you all for watching this quick video of the Oracle of Whimsy. If you're trying to get in for a tarot reading with me, I would love to give you a tarot reading. Or if you need a health and medical consult, I do that as well. And you can find all that information below this video. Be kind to all so that all will be kind to you too. God bless. Peace out. We'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye.